Welcome to Lesson 11 of Unit C4. My name is Daniel Ondisi and I use OpenSciEd in my classroom. In Lesson 11, we investigate how changing conditions like temperature and concentration can speed up the reaction that forms calcium carbonate. Let's anchor where we are in this unit's instructional storyline prior to jumping into Lesson 11. Coming out of Lesson 10, students figured out that excess hydrogen ions in acidified ocean water bond with carbonate, leaving calcium left out in the cold and unable to build shells. They also recognized that while natural processes like rock weathering add carbonate back to the ocean, that happens on a geologic timescale that takes thousands of years. But oyster larvae and hatcheries have a 48-hour biological window to build their initial shells before they die. So when we start this lesson, the class is wondering how we can manipulate conditions to speed up the shell building reaction to help those larvae survive their most vulnerable window. Let's take a look at the instructional design of Lesson 11. It's a 3-day investigation lesson with 2 main sense-making loops. There are no screens or digital devices required, which is always a nice pace change. It does require about 90 minutes of prep beforehand. Most of that time is spent preparing solution batches and setting up physical heating and cooling stations. So guarding that prep time is something I try to plan for in advance. Our lesson is broken down into 2 distinct sense-making loops. In Loop 1, students start by drawing on daily experiences where they speed up reactions, like raising heat on a stove. They then collaboratively plan to run a controlled experiment where they isolate either temperature or concentration to measure its effect on calcium carbonate formation. What they figure out is that increasing either variable yields more product in a shorter period of time. This naturally leaves them wondering what is happening at the invisible particle level to cause that increase in rate. For Loop 2, students address that particle level question. They analyze their lab data and use interactive reaction cards to model particle motion and collisions. Through this, they figure out that higher temperatures and concentrations lead to more frequent and energetic collisions. Furthermore, they discover that adding calcium carbonate provides essential carbonate ions for oysters while pulling free hydrogen ions out of the solution, which slightly raises the pH. They end the loop wondering how to evaluate this chemical solution against real-world social and environmental constraints. At the end of Lesson 11, the class establishes 3 core ideas. First, increasing reactant concentration or temperature allows more product to form in less time. Second, at the particle scale, this happens because molecules collide more frequently and with greater force, making bond breaking and forming more likely. And third, adding crushed calcium carbonate serves a dual role. It speeds up shell formation and pushes the ocean acidification reaction toward the reactants, locally reducing acidity. Now let's transition to our key instructional moments of the lesson. In Part 4, students sit in small groups with the Shell Building Investigation Planner, working through stoichiometry calculations to figure out the exact mass of sodium carbonate needed to react with a 0.1 molar calcium chloride solution. Students should be referencing their equations from prior lessons, measuring solutions, and discussing how to set up a scientifically designed investigation. This moment is valuable because it forces students to authentically apply what they learned in their mathematical tools rather than just following a recipe. Without precise stoichiometry, they can't determine the theoretical yield or know when the reaction has reached completion. This ruins their ability to measure a true reaction rate. As I navigate the room, I watch to ensure groups aren't just guessing quantities or trying to test temperature and concentration at the same time. I act as a strict gatekeeper here. I don't sign off on a group's procedure until they can state explicitly how they will measure the speed of product formation over time, such as timing precipitate settling or measuring mass intervals. In Part 8, the class gathers to share lab results, looking at data tables that show faster reaction times in warmer or more concentrated solutions. Collaborating students should be describing how quickly the cloudy precipitate formed in their beakers under different conditions. This discussion is instructionally important because it bridges macroscopic observations to kinetic molecular theory. I watch student thinking to see if they can explain why heat or concentration speeds things up beyond just stating that it happened. A common sticking point is that students talk about particles moving faster without connecting the movement to collisions. I like to use a bumper car analogy here. Packing more cars into an arena creates more collisions, while speeding them up makes those collisions more forceful. I push them to articulate that for bonds to break and form, the right particles must collide with sufficient kinetic energy. In part 11, students work at their desks in pairs, physically moving reaction cards across paper to model ions interacting in acidified water. You will hear students talking about where the extra carbonate ions go as they manipulate the cards. This hands-on modeling is valuable because it makes the abstract dual chemical benefit of adding calcium carbonate tangible. Students physically see that extra carbonate not only speeds up the shell building for the calcium, but also acts as a sponge for free hydrogen ions. While observing their modeling, I watch out for a misconception where students worry that forming carbonic acid from extra carbonate is bad because it has the word acid in it. If that comes up, I remind them from our insight from lesson 10. Carbonic acid molecules aren't what harms oysters. It's the unbonded free hydrogen ions that cause the damage. Bonding those free H plus ions ties them up and neutralizes the active threat. For part 13, the class sits in a scientist's circle facing the main wall charts, synthesizing their card modeling to a unified consensus model. Students point back and forth between particle diagrams and large system diagrams as they agree on how calcium carbonate affects pH and shell growth. This moment matters because it formalizes the equilibrium shift and maps a local chemical intervention back onto global Earth systems. I watch to make sure students connect the small-scale particle shifts to the large-scale carbon cycle. One practical facilitation move I found helpful here, students often try to draw individual particles directly onto the macro carbon cycle poster, which makes it cluttered and unreadable. Instead, I guide them to draft a simple step-by-step flowchart on the chart paper to show the chemical sequence, and then link that flowchart to the main poster. Now that students understand the chemistry of reaction rates and equilibrium shifts, they are left with an engineering question. Adding calcium carbonate works in a lab beaker, but how does it hold up in the real world? This sets us up to transition to lesson 12, where we leave the lab bench behind and start evaluating design solutions against real-world technical, environmental, and community criteria and constraints. Let's take a look at some classroom-tested material management and instructional strategies that have worked in my room. When it comes time to lab prep, I found it essential to prepare a large batch, roughly 2,500 milliliters per class of the 0.1 molar calcium chloride ahead of time using anhydrous calcium chloride. Precision and molarity really matters here for the stoichiometry to work out correctly during student planning. For heating and cooling, distributing hot plates, ice baths, or even just hot and cold tap water stations around the room keeps traffic flowing safely. If equipment is limited, you can use simply the temperature difference between hot tap water and cold tap water for the students. A common sticking point for students in this lab is that the reaction produces a fine, cloudy white powder rather than a hard, iridescent oyster shell. Students sometimes feel like their lab failed because they made chalk dust instead of a shell. More often, they just don't make a connection between what they see in the beaker and the oyster shell. What has worked for me is explaining the line between chemistry and biology. Our reaction makes the raw chemical building block, calcium carbonate, but living oysters expend biological energy to organize those particles into a rigid structure. This is also a great connection to previous discussions of how oyster larvae were forced to use that valuable energy to deal with excess bicarbonate instead of making their initial shells. To prove to them that the powder is identical to the shell material, I do a quick demo where I drop vinegar onto the precipitate. It fizzes and dissolves exactly like the marble chips and the oyster shells in lesson 10. Sometimes the calcium carbonate temperature trials can produce subtle visual differences that are tricky or even not possible to time precisely. If you want a quick, high contrast way to reinforce the effect of temperature on reaction rates, something that helps is bringing in a simple glow stick demonstration. I have students place the uncracked glow sticks in hot water versus ice water and then snap them simultaneously. The dramatic difference in brightness and reaction speed gives them an immediate, memorable visual for how thermal energy speeds up chemical reactions. When I set up the concentration variable for this lab, one practical move that has made a big difference in my classroom is asking students to dissolve their sodium carbonate powder in water to create a solution first, rather than having students scoop dry powder directly into the calcium chloride beaker. When students combine two completely clear liquids and immediately see that white cloudy calcium carbonate precipitate appear, the chemical reaction is obvious to everyone. If they dump solid powder straight into a liquid, students almost always assume that the white substance settling at the bottom is just leftover, undissolved reactant that didn't mix in. Starting with two aqueous solutions avoids that misconception and entirely keeps their focus right where it belongs, on observing and measuring the rate of chemical change. In terms of vocabulary management, reaction rate is the key term students earn in this lesson. I make a point not to define it at the very beginning of day one. Instead, I wait until part 3 after students have debated how to measure speed for their lab reactions, and once they've established that they are measuring product yield over time, we co-construct the formal definition together in their glossaries. On the wall, you'll want to pull out the carbon cycle model poster we saved from lesson 10, and that's pretty much it. That brings us to the end of our preparation for lesson 11. Next up in lesson 12, they'll take these chemical principles and start applying criteria and constraints to design real-world solutions for protecting oyster populations. Thanks for all you do to support student sense making in the classroom. Good luck, and you got this.